drafted for the military, actually at 43 when he got drafted, then turned down. He ended up buying the Wilson Resort south of the Okoboji Store Bridge. So I've lived there from 44 until 66. At one time, my wife and I had 28 wooden boats. Towards the tail end of our resort career, I ended up purchasing 4 aluminum boats, which gave me a fleet of 32 boats. Now the dreadful memory I have of this was that those 28 wooden boats had to be painted inside and out every spring, 2 coats of paint. And that meant a lot of scraping and a lot of work. And how I finally got out of it was by buying aluminum boats and selling the wooden ones off. Now there's a controversy between me and Steve Kennedy, and we're going to finish the argument when I get to heaven and see him. Because the discussion we had, Steve would call me a lot when he got something in related to the Maritime Museum. And his impression of the stern of a wooden rowboat, that it looked like a wine glass. I said, Steve, that is not true. Those sterns were described as wishbone sterns. And that goes back to the shape of the original rear end of the boat to most people, either the front or the back, or the rear end of the boat. In our accumulation as rental boats, I had an original ARP cedar strip 16-foot boat. I had boats made by other boat builders in the area, and I happen to have just a short list, and I think it's the only list of boats that were built like Jim's grandfather and father. Jim can recall helping his father build boats in their basement, so that's why I'm going to turn some of this over to him on my part. But back in the number of different boats we had, I had a boat built by the Art Brothers, which is where Okoboji Boats is now. Had, of course, the Hafer boats, and there was 2 different style of boats. Glenn built the rowboat with the, quote, wishbone transom, quote, wine glass transom. We also had Hafer boats that had the transom designed for outboard motors, 2.5 or 5 horse motors. Then going from the Art Boat Works, Ted and Jack Gipner built wooden rowboats, very similar to the original Hafer boat. And a number of these guys that I'm going to list actually worked for John and Glenn, learned how to do it, and then built boats on their own later on. Some of them even snuck a few of Hafer's brass plates and attached them to boats that they were reproductions, but they were not original Hafers. And I'd go to court of law to dispute some of these remarks because I've had personal experience with a lot of these people. I knew John and Glenn. I watched them build boats for my father. On our first order, I think Dad ordered 8 boats from him, if I remember right. So I had the opportunity to watch John and Glenn run a hand plane, full 16 or 18 foot length, peel out a piece of cedar planking and shape it so when it fit the contour of the boat, some of those boats would not take a drop of water on, even without being painted. That's how well made they were. And Jim can tell you more about some of the assembly, the nail and that stuff. But after Ted and Jack Gipner down in Okoboji, Zeke or Harry Wilson, he made boats in the bottom of the Okoboji store. Tom Christensen built boats out at the lagoon, the northwest corner of West Okoboji. He also built boats in Montgomery, Iowa. He had a big building there to build them. There's also a fellow that probably none of you have ever heard of by the name of Jim Christensen. And to the best of my knowledge, he had no relationship with Tom, but he made wooden rowboats at the Sawmill Bridge. I've got pictures for you from that today because his son Bob was a classmate of mine. I never actually saw Jim build boats. Charlie West lived right here in town. His son Chuck Jr. and I worked together with the telephone crew, and he built Hafer-style boats in his garage, and he built, I think it was 8 boats for Dad, because our fleet kept increasing up to the point where we had 28 wooden rowboats. After Charlie West, I found out that Cecil Nelson at the south end of Spirit built boats across the street in his garage, very similar to the original. Everett Williams, I don't know if any of you Spirit Lake people remember Everett. He lived on the west side of Big Spirit. He was a mailman for years.
Was he the son of the photographer?
He was,
Yeah.
was it a son or grandson? Son, yeah, I think you're right.
The son,
Yeah,
the
all right.
original son.
The boat that him and 2 Spirit Lake men that worked for John, I believe you might have, the 14-foot Hafer.
Okay.
It was actually made in a garage on the west side of Big Spirit,
Okay.
but Everett never put the tag on it.
Shut that off. Excuse me.
Then we're getting down to the junior member of the boat builders here, Les Dandum, and what was your grandfather's name, Jim?
Normie.
Normie. All right, they built boats down where Jim grew up, Normie and Les, and Jim and his brother Jerry had the opportunity to take part in that, and I'll let him describe how you build a boat officially. I did it from observation. He actually did it by work.